Hello and welcome to another episode of the K-Files. I'm Sean and I'm here with Matt.
Hi Sean.
And Corey.
Hey buddies.
And it's actually just us three. Our last two episodes both had a guest on, and it's just the three of us. The classic configuration, the lament configuration. Tonight, it's also Shrove Tuesday, and that's completely irrelevant to the discussion that's coming up. I just wanted to mention it. I'll be honest, I haven't done as much preparation for this one as maybe I should have done, but it's been a very, very difficult couple of weeks. So I'm not sure where we're going to be kicking off with this one, but we are going to be talking about... this is something that I said in our first episode, but I reckon we're going to be talking a lot about the media and media products that Mark Fisher engaged with. So we're going to be talking a lot about Eyes Wide Shut tonight. So I hope everybody remembered to bring their masks and capes with them. Venetian masks preferably, but we're open to everything.
And ermine-lined coat.
And I don't really know who wants to kick us off tonight, actually. I'm very happy for this to be a little bit of a free and easy one.
Does someone... Yeah, I was going to say...
You want to go first, Matt?
Well, no, I was going to say, Corey, this was your pick too, wasn't it?
Yeah, so Sean mentioned Eyes Wide Shut, but it's the Mark Fisher piece that we're talking about is it was titled "Have You Been Enjoying Yourself?" Which was about, and I thought that it was a perfect follow-up to the previous episode because it ties directly into the monarch kind of mind control element that we were discussing there through the lens of Eyes Wide Shut, and also just talking a lot about the movie and its critical reception. And I know I appreciate some good cinema, and Kubrick doesn't make bad movies, so I was excited to talk about both the piece and the film.
Yes, exactly. Yes, to be clear, but we're not reviewing a film. We are talking about a piece of writing that Mark Fisher produced about Eyes Wide Shut. Forgive me.
Which I guess to say it also was when we're sort of straying away from CCRU territory where we've been in the past sort of 2 weeks, though only just, I think, because this was a blog post written for the Hyperstition blog, and nicely dedicated to Reza Negrestani, though I'm not sure why, but maybe we can talk about that. But yeah, there's lots to unpack here, and I think you're right, Corey. This is a really nice follow-on, but there's so many directions we could go. I'm kind of very interested to hear everyone's thoughts.
Yes, and it's interesting what you say, but we're not straying too far from the CCRU because, in fact, this piece ends with a lengthy quotation from "Who's Pulling Your Strings?"
Yes,
which Mark does not present as having been written by himself. Interestingly, maybe we'll have something to say about that. I was actually just all through that. I was just scrolling through our chat on Twitter to find the article again because I didn't have it on my screen. Corey, do you want to take the lead a little bit with telling us what the piece of writing we're talking about actually covers?
Okay. Well, it is a long piece, and so there are a lot of different elements to it. But as I mentioned, the main one is the critical reception of the film Eyes Wide Shut, and basically how wrong-headed it was for most film critics to completely dismiss the movie as being boring, and in particular the orgy scene for being completely uninteresting, and the sex mechanical. And so from there, he's also talking about, sticking with the CCRU, he's talking, he uses the movie as an example of talking about twinning, with, pairing the orgy scene to a scene right near the end. Some interesting points about that one. And then he's also talking about command, through the monarch mind control kind of connections between this movie or with this movie as offered by some apparent or supposed monarch survivors, which also ties back into our first episode of the K-Files where I was talking about burrows and control. So yes, there's a lot here. Did we want to give a little synopsis of the film?
Yes, I think that I think that'd be a good place to start. If no one has anything in particular prepared, I'll do that quite happily.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit about the background and the controversy around the film before I get into the plot. And it's not very plot heavy, which I like. There's not too much happens in the film really, but it's Kubrick's last film, and there are some question marks hanging around its level of completeness, with detractors saying that basically, we got the work print. That this was not a finished product, and that it was, the studio wanted to get it out, and so on. While its defenders and just other speakers on it while acknowledging that it is unfinished, and unfinished in the sense that everything was shot, but Kubrick was famous for editing his films not only right up until the last moment, but literally during initial screenings, like past test screenings, he would still do edits to things. He didn't tend to leave things alone. And the fact that he didn't finish editing Eyes Wide Shut before his death at the hands of the Illuminati doesn't necessarily mean that the film we got isn't as close as Damn It to what his vision would have been. We don't know, and there's different people have said different things about it. I mean, I'm not a film historian or Kubrick scholar or anything like that. I just like Kubrick's films, and I like this film. It was I think it's because the other thing with it is not only are there these questions about its level of completeness. It does have detractors who say that, like you said already, Corey, that it's just not very good. That it's a middling Kubrick offering, and it's a pity that it's his last film. I don't agree with that. I actually like Eyes Wide Shut a lot. I think it's a very interesting film. I don't think it necessarily compares with his with the classic run of his films, The Shining in 2001 and so on. I do, however, think that it is a strong film, and I actually prefer it to Full Metal Jacket, which I don't like very much. But anyway, I'm not actually talking about what the film's about. So it's based on it's an adaptation of a novella called Traumnovelle by I believe it was an Austrian writer, Arthur Schnitzler. And Traumnovelle literally means dream story. And the film does have a dreamy energy to it. It is like I said, it's not very plot heavy really. It's and that's one of the things I like about it. But basically it's about Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman playing this New York married couple, he being a doctor, Bill Harford, and they attend a Christmas party hosted by one of his patients, a wealthy man called Victor Ziegler. And during this party, Tom Cruise helps Ziegler out of a situation he's gotten himself in, because a woman who is not his wife, who was at this party, who was a sex worker, has overdosed, and he, subtly brings Bill up to the upper floor to just make this problem go away, basically, just to sort of make sure she doesn't die and so on. It's a very distant kind of approach he has towards this woman, and following this the events, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman have an argument over her confession that she had fantasies of infidelity at a holiday they went on, and this kind of unsettles and angers him so much that he just sort of goes out into the night. Basically, he goes out into New York on this sort of aimless psychosexual voyage, basically. And he, for example, he nearly ends up sleeping with another sex worker. And eventually he ends up at a masked ritual satanic orgy. And which is something I'm sure we've all been in that position where, because we all know how a night out can go, and he's not meant to be there, and he gets caught out, and one of the masked naked women at this party says that she will offer herself as a sacrifice in his place so he can get out. And then he is so disturbed by all of these events, eventually he winds up meeting with Ziegler again, who tells him pretty like flat out, look, you don't understand what you're meddling with here. I was at that party last night, and I know you think it's something like tremendously sinister and dark, and that we probably killed that woman and all of that. I said, no. That was all just to scare you. Don't worry about it, buddy. Don't worry about it. And he confesses everything to his wife, and they go Christmas shopping, and that's kind of it. Like, not a lot actually happens in this film. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about, I'll talk a little bit about why I like this film. I like that nothing really happens in it, and I'm not kidding when I say that, like, it does have that feeling of like how a night out can go weird, and I mean that very sincerely. But it does have that wonderful feeling of how like a series of events you can just end up being swept up in all, you know, let's call it in the Deleuzian schizophrenic voyage, right, where you just end up passing through all of these different thresholds that you weren't expecting and end up somewhere you weren't planning on ending up. There's something just quite enticing about this directionless journey he goes on, and again, it is very dreamlike. It does have that feeling of you're participating, but but almost voyeuristically, and we the audience literally voyeuristic, pervy watching, and as indeed does he does at the party as well, at the orgy he goes to. He doesn't participate, and it's unclear if he wants to even. He does just kind of drift through these rooms, and he talks to some of the women there, but it is just this sense of a directionless voyage he's going through here. And I will also say actually that I am actually a bit of a defender of 90s Tom Cruise, and I think he's really good in this. And it's a nice reminder. I mean, my theory of Tom Cruise is that he's a character actor stuck in a leading man's body, because he always seems to be at his best when he's playing a guy who's super creepy and very intense, because that is who Tom Cruise actually is. Like
in Magnolia, he is just magnificent because the character is such a piece of shit.
I haven't seen Magnolia, but the film I was going to say was Collateral, the Michael Mann film, where he plays a hitman. I can't remember if his character's ever named, actually, but he is just very, very chilling and very, very, again, just very, very creepy. And it's a pity he just seems to make these terrible science fiction films now that no one seems to see. And I do reckon that it has to just be the Scientology, right? But he just keeps making these films, which he presumably thinks are documentaries. That was cruel, but it's nice. It was nice to be reminded of, you know, he does actually have sort of like good acting like chops there. And in fact, I want to talk about the argument scene a little bit later, but I think there's some really interesting things he does there. And Nicole Kidman is absolutely superb in this as well. She especially the scene of her at the party at the beginning of the film where she's dancing with this sort of like older man. He's a Hungarian, I believe, and it does have this, and actually that feeling of sort of like old world European decadence definitely lingers throughout all of his film, actually, and he does have that energy to her, and she has this kind of it's quite uncomfortable actually, but she has this kind of sort of like coquettish, almost like dizzy schoolgirl persona that she puts on with him. She clearly isn't like that as a woman, as the woman that she's playing, but she sort of assumes this persona of like, you know, she goes a while before she mentions she has a husband, for instance, you know, and it's a lot. It's just full of like really, really interesting performances. I really like this film. It doesn't deserve its reputation as a failure. Like I said, I don't think it stands as high as films like The Shining and A Clockwork Orange in 2001, which I think are incredible works of art. But it is a very, very interesting film. It's definitely worth watching, if nothing else. And what Mark identifies in this essay, but he says that you have really like three positions on this film, which we've already alluded to, but we'll bring them out again, which are the detractors who think it is it is at best flawed, and at worst it is simply a failed film. Its supporters who arguably being a bit of contrarian, I think, say, oh, it's as good as anything he did. It may be even his best film or something like that, which it definitely isn't. But then, I mean, no, seriously, sort of like, it is really, really good, but sort of like, no, it's not Kubrick's best work. I think it's a really interesting film, though. And then you have the fun ones who say, well, actually, Kubrick was spilling the beans about the Illuminati, about the and that's why they killed him after he made this film and so on.
They shot him with the heart attack gun.
Shot him with a fucking heart attack gun because he'd already revealed the secrets of the faked moon landing with The Shining, obviously, and this was just like the final, the straw breaking the camel's back with him spilling the secrets of the global conspiracy. Anyway, just quickly. And what Mark basically says here is that, in a certain sense, the conspiracy theorists are right. This is a film that spills the beans, but not the beans of, and we're alluding back here to Who's Pulling Your Strings, not of an actual specific conspiratorial group, but almost just like the actual really grubby real-world mechanics of conspiracy, of conspiring, of groups of privileged individuals maintaining their privilege and using it to have fun, ultimately, to enjoy themselves. Matt, I think you had something you wanted to say there.
Yeah, well, I mean, if only there's not more to say from what you've just said, actually. I kind of want to see if, Corey, have anything more to say on the film itself? Though I do have there's a thread that I want to pull on where Mark kind of went with that reading elsewhere, I guess adding some more sort of background to maybe which one of those three people he is more broadly, but maybe we can stick a pin in that if there's more to be said.
Well, now the only thing I wanted to say is like last time, Amy didn't appreciate my purely materialist reading of Who's Pulling Your Strings. So this time around, I'm flipping things, and I 100% believe that this film was Kubrick trying to reveal the conspiracy, reveal the true conspiracy of the international ring of elite pedophiles. And he was killed by a heart attack gun. And if I die in the next few weeks under suspicious circumstances, you know why, buddies.
I don't know why I've just done what I've done. I've just put a Trable extra strong peppermint in my mouth, and I don't know why I've done that because I'm meant to be talking, and like this is like a confectionery that hangs around as well, with like little bits of stone.
You're trying to silence yourself unconsciously. It's before speaking truth.
Yeah, what a stupid thing to do. Anyway, actually, like I don't have like a take about masks exactly, but on that subject, it is interesting that the mask as a signifier of... I'm going to take this mint out of my mouth, sorry. What the fuck was I doing there? I'll put it on this piece of paper.
Save it for later.
What a stupid thing to do. Anyway. Leave that in. Masks. Okay, like, masks... Like, I actually put a post of this on Instagram a while ago after I watched... Like, we all watched Squid Game, right? We all watched and really got into Squid Game.
I actually haven't yet because I'm really, like, behind on the times, but don't let that stop you.
So... But yeah, it's just interesting that the mask is off. Like there is this kind of meme almost of the masked, hooded figure, being the action, being the people behind the conspiracy. And there's something very obvious in that, the mask, covers the face, it hides the identity, which is what a conspiracy needs. It needs to have one's identity hidden. But it's just something very striking of. Like how often it does that particular thing seems to be used, and you have it in The Shining. Interestingly, like you have the there's this one of the most famous scenes from that is at the end when the supernatural or psychosexual elements of it are really erupting into the foreground. There's the baffling scene of I think he's meant to be sort of like the man who originally founded the hotel being filleted by a man wearing a bear costume with like a mask on, which is a deeply, deeply strange, disturbing thing to see. And we have this repeated in Eyes Wide Shut with the Venetian masks, which are very like weird looking, quite like warped, ugly masks. And Squid Game, again, like towards the end of Squid Game, when like the evil billionaires who are behind this whole thing for their own amusement turn up, again, they're wearing these masks. They're wearing these very highly stylized animal masks. And it feels like these things aren't so much matters of hiding one's identity as they are hierarchical symbols almost, or emblems of authority. And maybe indeed both. And I remember actually something that Derrida says in Spectres of Marx, when he talks about the meaning of the helmet, right? And as like the knight's helmet with its visor as the ultimate symbol of authority, because what that bestows upon the wearer is the ability to perceive without being perceived, because you are covered by this, you are made in a sense, your gaze is made invisible by the mask, by the helmet, by the visor. So it becomes emblematic of the ultimate power, or that ultimate power, God's own power of perceiving without being himself perceived. And it's just a very, very emblematic image that I find really interesting, that it comes up like this, like and I don't think there's necessarily anything sinister behind it. I think it's just obviously just a very, very powerful signified emblem of this kind of power, of this power that retreats into the shadows, the power of a power that displaces itself.
Another thought I had is that it could also be like giving the person sort of like a mental or psychic distance from their actions and their own self. Like if we assume that these are like these wealthy elite were once real people with hearts, then at some point they destroyed that, and they need to compartmentalize in order to be able to maintain, a family and a job, or, keep running their industries and maintaining their families whilst also conducting these, murderous satanic sex rituals.
Because I think that's the thing about the animals, though, too. I almost think like if I'd almost disagree that if there's an authority, or maybe there is no authority, but it's like there's some stuff in this essay kind of going on what we were talking about last time with Amy about like double binds and that kind of twinning. Whereas if kind of what you're saying, Corey, there's that as if to wear an animal mask is like gives you permission to kind of tap into some like base animality of the human animal. Which seems ironic that you have to do that by putting on a kind of... To get to your base self, you have to put on an artificial mask. As if you have to pretend to be authentic, sort of thing.
Fake it till you make it, baby.
Yeah, totally. But in a weirdly sort of twisted way. That I think, Mark Osner does draw out in this piece a bit, but seems to be... I think that's true, though, that you were sort of saying, Sean, that there's that... That's in a lot of Kubrick's films, almost. I feel like that's... Well, maybe in all of them. The kind of... That's the strange sort of masking of Spartacus, even, going back that far, of the I am Spartacus of losing yourself in a multitude, or the strange the disintegration of the individual in 2001, or the same thing in a sort of more horrific sense in The Shining.
And there's the masks that Alex and his droogs wear in The Clockwork Orange as well, when they break into the writer's home and sexually assault his wife.
Yeah, and I guess maybe there's... I mean, I kind of wanted to pull on this in what's in the bit that Mark draws out of this post, and kind of what he talks about elsewhere, that maybe... I think maybe gives a bit of background to what Mark maybe finds so interesting about this film, and maybe that will give us some sort of talking points. Because I think it's quite a controversial way of looking at it, though Mark gets some interesting sign-offs, which I think I'll come to. But it's the one piece in this essay, this blog post on Hyperstition, where Mark starts talking about this critic called Creeder. I might be pronouncing that wrong. But it's that part of the what you were alluding to, Sean, with the the people that dislike the film for being a bit too hammy, maybe, or cold. And Mark writes, sort of quoting this guy as he goes, Creedle's analysis is especially interesting because it begins by explicitly taking on the critical consensus that has settled around the film. Quote, critical disappointment with eyes wide shut is almost unanimous, he says. Moreover, the complaint was always the same, not sexy. Creedler instead stresses the economic and the political, or rather the political economic at the expense of the sensual, Creeder, Kubrick stresses the political economic at the expense of the sensual. Or better, no, I've clipped this quote for myself and now I'm getting my subjects mixed up. Anyway, or better, he argues that Kubrick's film shows the sensual cannot be seen outside the political or the economic. Which feels like there's potential to kind of make what is not sexy even less sexy there. But I think that there's this great post, and there's kind of two sort of things I wanted to kind of point to going out from this. But I think it was around the same time this was written that Mark ended up having a really long-winded and actually quite brilliant argument with a bunch of people on an old Stanley Kubrick forum. That was called, what was it called? AMK was the acronym he gives it. Alt Movies Kubrick was this old Kubrick forum. And I kind of just wanted to read a little bit of it because I think it contextualizes us a bit further and kind of shows that this... I think maybe what we'll actually come to look at in later weeks, where Mark, cause it kind of goes in this sort of cold rationalist bent. That's what he calls it anyway. Anyway, there's this bit where in this long thread that I've exhumed from the archives, there's a character called Lord Bullingdon, who no one seems to like. I'll paint a bit of a scene here because this is sort of mid-2000s forum days. And this guy sort of says, he starts this thread and he says, I've always pointed out that Kubrick's work has a sense of detachment, of bloodlessness. He likes to take organic subjects and dissemble them as if they were mechanical. It's not just that he wants to know what makes us tick. What's compulsive is conviction that we do all tick. And the first response is, fuck off, you prick. But Mark comes in. There's a bit of back and forth, and Mark comes in and he says, actually, I totally agree with you. And I think it's kind of interesting that not just Eyes Wide Shut, but all of Kubrick's films kind of fit into this. And Mark says, under another nom de plume of his, which is also from the CCRU days, which is Mark de Rosario. And he says, I absolutely do agree. I wonder if what is cold or slow, I wonder why it is that cold and slow are automatically deemed to be negative. It is precisely Kubrick's coldness and slowness that are missed in contemporary culture, that is so obsessively warm and fast. Ingratiating, emotionally exploitative, relentlessly fidgety. Kubrick took us out of ourselves, not via the transports of ecstatic fervour, but through the icy contemplation of what drives and traps us, and through the vision of a universe indifferent to our passions. To see the mechanical deathliness of the human world from the perspective of that indifferent universe, that is what Kubrick offered us, a vision of God, which is also an approximation of God's vision. Kubrick returns, why deny it, to an essentially religious sensibility, although his religion is atheistic in the same sense Spinoza's was. For Spinoza, God equals immanence, matter in itself, the gloriously dispassionate, desolated cosmos. Kubrick evokes the desubjectified affects of awe and dread rather than the compulsory, socially endorsed warm emotions of empathy, sympathy, as homage to a universe whose indifference entails not pessimism but freedom from the miserable prison house of the human. Which sounds like quite a loaded reading of Kubrick, but I think part of the reason I think this is a kind of a great thing to dig out of Marx is this sort of forum quote is because in this thread walks Gordon Stainforth, who was the music editor on The Shining, who comments, brilliant comment, Mark, and I believe a very accurate summation of Kubrick. But I think that that's maybe some of what's coming through when this Mark's kind of talking about, at least in this in the actual essay that we're reading today, this kind of like that strange like rejection of the sensual, the all these complaints about Eyes Wide Shut, about the Mark kind of spends at least half the essay sort of talking about, right, the kind of disparity between this kind of an orgy, like an excessively almost pantomime orgy scene, like someone calls it, like, whose idea of an orgy is this? The Catholic Church's, as if it's sort of like an extreme, exaggerated version, versus a lot of the actual supposedly normalized sex, which is really banal and unsexy and unsensual.
There would have been way more children if it was the Catholic Church. Had to say it, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, they would be, but that's where they get their sacrifice fuel from, no doubt. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of interested, I guess, in bringing that up for a few reasons, but not only because I think that that's kind of what we spent a little bit of time talking about previously, almost, especially this sort of a sense that it's not just conspiratorial, but actually fundamentally quite religious in a kind of quite, maybe, I don't know, maybe not a normative sense, but it's Gnostic, right? And I guess that's something that kind of comes up that we've talked about or talked around a fair bit, but also brings up something just about Mark that I find really interesting, which is that I think the more that you kind of delve into this kind of version of his writing, Mark was himself pretty agnostic, quite openly so. And though he sort of has this sort of cold rash, I mean, that's the part that he quotes in the end from the essay that we read last week, Who's Pulling Your Strings? The attempt to refute such narratives of this, like the CCRU and other people, is drawn to be a tedious double game. One either has to embrace an arbitrary and outrageous cosmic plot, or alternatively advocate submission to the most mundane construction of quotidian reality, which is why atheism is usually so boring. I think that's a really interesting tension that I was kind of interested to just talk about, actually, and I don't know if that's sort of fitting in the context of this film, but how do you talk about Eyes Wide Shut as a fundamentally religious film? Can you even do that?
Well, it depends what you mean by religious, which I know isn't maybe a very helpful thing to say.
No, it's true though. It's true. I'm not preloading it really, but maybe because this is sort of where my own ignorance comes in. And I'm curious to open it up. But I mean, how would you define it, or at least in this context, maybe?
Well, I mean, it's. I'm glad that you brought up that remark. You know, whose idea of an orgy is this? The Catholic Church, because that is it's a very revealing comment. That, and
sure.
I did actually sort of have that in my notes as sort of like something I do want to talk about, and I think this will lead us into actually talking about some of the themes that Mark explicitly brings out of this film, which is I'm not wanting to get too sociological about like trying to proffer a definition of religion here. We can certainly say that it is a film about ritual, though, and ritual and religion obviously are very, very closely tied with one another. That I mean, ritual is just a part of all of our lives, all of the time, whether we like it or not. But it is still a word that we associate the word ritual with religious, spiritual, mystical, occult acts. You know, it's I think. Well, what happens when we engage in ritual, right? I mean, it's a suspension of the normal. It's an act where we somehow like subject ourselves to a rubric of some kind, to some kind of like set of rules or traditions, principles, motivations that come from outside of ourselves. Although I suppose and I think it is even true of ecstatic ritual, where the whole point is like total loss of control over the self and just letting the inner energies flow out. while for, a more right-hand path ritual action, like the Mass, for instance, is very much about, the proper following of the rules that are being imposed on you. So rituals, they're outside of our ordinary way of doing things. They're outside of the ordinary, and they are symbolically rich in their imagery and their actions. But I think that we shouldn't. I think the mistake that conspiracism often makes when it comes to symbol is to try and sort of like reduce symbols down to just X equals Y tables of correspondence, and the same with ritual gestures and actions, where when we talk about a ritual, we do commonly say, well, this gesture means that, or it represents this. And I think that representational way of thinking about ritual, it distracts us from the experiential aspect of what actually occurs when we engage in ritual, or when we participate or watch a ritual.
What should you be feeling when you do that motion, rather than what the motion represents?
Yes, or what the gesture brings about in you. And as followers of me on Twitter, at least, will know that I'm a fairly sort of like traditional high church Anglican, despite the subject matter of this podcast, and I have a great love of traditional liturgical rituals, and there's and a lot of that comes from this sense that when we engage in ritual, we're able to deal with. I'm trying to think of a way of saying this without sounding superstitious, but dealing with forces or energy, or just conceptual apparatus that isn't there for us normally. Like, this is how we access it. This is how we produce certain affects in ourselves and other people. This is how we stimulate certain kinds of consciousness, and all of this can be read in a purely materialist way, I hasten to add as well. You can, like Bataille does, sort of like for him the ritual is always the point, and that's kind of what I'm driving at here. That that comment of like, whose idea of an orgy is this? The Catholic Church? Well, the Catholic Church would have a very good idea of what an orgy is, in a certain sense, especially a ritualized one, because what religions realize is the ritual is the point. Which is a line you also see in the new Dune film. The point of ceremony is ceremony, and again, the point of ritual is ritual. It's not necessarily what it's meant to symbolize. It is the happening of the symbols themselves that matters. And if we do want to be, and if we want to be psychoanalytic about it in a certain sense, or at least maybe in a little bit of a lay sense, at least, what it is that's happening here is in the ritual orgy is it is a sublimation of sensuality into this situation of controlled symbolic ritual actions, and although it is through the ritual action, it is through the ritual that like these forces, these energies are unleashed, but the structure of the ritual is also the control force that's imposed on them in order to direct them in particular ways. And you can call that the double bind of it, I guess. So you need the ritual in order to provoke the sensual affect, but the ritual is also there to control and direct it in a particular way. And I think that's true, and I think that is also true of ecstatic ritual, of what we would imagine as being very free, happy dancey ritual, right? It's still the same thing. It's about provoking and then directing those energies. And again, when I say energies, you can read it in a purely materialist sense, just talking about affects of consciousness and experience. You don't have to read anything I've said there in wishy-washy new age ways.
No, but I think that's what I'm trying to get at, really, is that I think you focusing on ritual.
I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, you have. You've actually clarified my question better than I think I put it, because I think the focus on ritual is precisely what I guess I was waving at, and you got that, because far better articulate on this stuff than I am, I think. But I think that's kind of what I found really interesting about this piece, and maybe I'm slightly driving the discussion here, so I don't want to do that too much, but I guess it's what I just found super interesting about even the film and the way that Mark sort of frames it and all these other critics frame it, because it's not just that, I guess it's that you even saying, you're not, you can read this however you want, but I guess that's partly the point. To say that we're talking about ritual, we needn't close ritual itself off into a kind of traditional sense of what religion is. I think of religiosity in a sort of really general sense, because I think that's what Mark kind of talks about, where when he's talking about sex in this film, and the kind of the joyless coupling that we see, and also the ecstatic orgy, where you have, I mean, who's to say that one's more ritualistic than the other? What's in the sense that you can be in a kind of loveless marriage that has sex once a week, sort of. There is a rituality to that as much as there is a ritual sense to the showy excessive orgy, and I think that's what he's kind of to get psychoanalytic about it. I mean, Mark does, right? He sort of says that. The affectless, banal quality of the orgy that so turned critics off is in fact the truth of sex. Ironically, given the Dennis Wheatley-esque ornateness of the staging, the tediously mechanical couplings are pure sex, i.e. sex stripped of any phantasmatic component, i.e. sex that is purely phenomenal physical rather than phantasmatic real. The joyless Somerton sex carnival is the Burroughs Bosch garden of delights, the venal, idiotic, mechanical repetition of the pleasure principle laid bare. Which I think, I mean, we could probably, it's probably one of the knottier, slightly more reaching things, but we could, I mean, well, I was going to say, we have to discuss Mark Fisher and sex on another episode of the podcast. It's probably not the one that most people want to listen to, but I think it's a really interesting, the way that Mark writes about sex, I think is fascinating and kind of quite queer, quite openly so, or at least he has a kind of a very questioning perspective on how sex functions socially and ritually and all the rest of it, that I think is, I mean, that's maybe something from the time, but it's all kind of in here and loaded into this kind of reading of Kubrick, which I find super interesting. But, it's as if I guess, I mean, if I'm reticent to even I guess what I'm reticent to focus in, because I think a lot of what's even been talked about here is how actually these things blow outwards. You can focus in on something that's maybe somewhat concrete, like sex as a topic, but actually that sort of sense of double binds, the phantasmatic versus the physical, the material, immaterial, the, I don't know, Gnostic, scientific, whatever. I think what Mark likes about Kubrick and likes just in a lot of his writing is how that gets expanded outwards, and you can move quickly from sex to, I think that's why this post dedicated to Reza. That's kind of what Reza does in Cyclonopedia, starting to talk about, the idea that the war in Iraq was a war over oil, and expanding that outwards to a kind of cosmic war of across time and space, where oil is a kind of, I don't know, what is it, like a death juice of decomposed corpses, or which is true. There's a materiality that's very scientifically true, but the way that it's portrayed as a kind of cosmic horror, it's the throw up of the two, the double bind of being scientifically accurate and also giving into the kind of cosmic plot and enjoying the cosmic plot reading of it. But I mean, I guess I'm feeling flashbacks of when we discussed schizophrenia and Deleuze and Guattari. There's a kind of tendency to make huge strides here. That's what I really like about it, but also maybe it's quite difficult for listeners to follow. So I'll maybe shut up.
Well, I just wanted to mention something, I guess, kind of materialist or economic about the presentation of the orgy scene, and I think like critics taking issue with it being unsexy just seems like they completely miss the point, because it's not about sex. I think like it's about fucking, and it's like fucking those beneath you, both metaphorically and literally, and doing it just because you can get away with it, because like you're the true sons and daughters of capital, and like you run society and you control culture, and you know, maybe you need or you want a secret and over the top ritual to demonstrate how far above the hoi polloi you are. And something that I haven't seen commented on, but and I'd need to rewatch the movie to double check, is that you don't actually see anyone having sex who doesn't look like a model or a sex worker. Like you don't see like a middle-aged fat guy getting it on or anything like that. And like all you actually see in the film is their voyeurism. So it's like the ultra wealthy, they're like so far above common people, like that they're even above the like necessary biological acts of copulation. Like all they do is they sit around in their fancy clothes watching our little lives, and you know, they're somewhat bored and completely detached from those material realities. Like it's not a fun, sexy orgy. It's just a representation of control.
That's the one. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
It was just there was one line I think that fits with this, but I won't be long. But it's the kind of it's just something that Mark has at the end. Where he says, "Eyes wide shut demonstrates that, however banal it must be, in order to be normalized into or as everyday life, power depends upon mystagogic authoritarian ritualization. There is always a secret society, even if the secret it protects is its own vacancy or void." Which I think, totally what you just said. It's just, I wish there was more on that in here, actually, especially about the models. I hadn't thought of that, but it's the perfect representation of it for sure.
Yeah, what I was going to say, because I think that is like the key to this whole piece, is that idea that the two things that go along with power, you know, is mystagogic spectacle and then just dreary quotidian reality of accepting it, and which is why you have this you have the party at the start of the film, you know, which is just like a fancy party and a sex worker who's been brought in for Ziegler overdoses, and they have to just look after her to make sure she doesn't die, because then that would just be a whole thing to deal with. Really,
so much paperwork.
Yeah, literally, like that is the attitude, though, isn't it? So, like, because it'll be a thing, and we don't want it to be a thing, so you're not going to make sure it won't be a thing. And then you have the great ritual orgy, and it is that the party at the beginning of it just shows the truth of this, and explicitly so, in fact, because when Tom Cruise becomes convinced that the woman who said she was going to die in his place actually did die, and proved there was something like really like dark and satanic about all of this, when he comes across an obituary to her, and Ziegler says sort of like, yeah, she did die. It wasn't us who killed her. She just overdosed because she was just one of those people. And like explicitly says, you're just like the woman at the party. So you know what it's like with these people. There's always how it's going to go. And I wanted to kind of like, it's maybe it's only a little bit tangential, but I wanted to bring up another couple of films to put this in, like, to compare and contrast. And there's two, I'm not sure if I'm going to get onto both of them, but the two films that I think are most similar to this in terms of subject matter are Network and Society. Have you both seen, have either of you seen either of them? There we go.
I've seen Network.
Which one is Network? Is that...
I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think I have actually then.
They're both
I know that line from Osmosis.
Yeah, like they're very good actually. They're very, very good. Like I mean, Network is very 70s. It also lost out Best Picture to Rocky, which I hate that film. I remember watched Rocky. That's it. This is Rocky. Jesus Christ. Anyway, and so I'll give you a rundown of both of them very, very quickly. Like Network is about a TV presenter, I think he's a newscaster, called Howard Beale, I think his name is, who is told he's being laid off because his ratings just aren't good enough anymore by the network he works for, and he just has an on-air breakdown about just like how everything in our lives is just absolute fucking shit, and leading to the great apocalyptic declaration, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, and which a lot of people find very, very inspiring, and they like scream it into the night. And this is great ratings, so they just keep him on and just let him do this. Was obviously very, very ill man going through descending deeper and deeper into his psychosis. And there's also, like, tangential to what we're going to be talking about, there's this thing where there's this group who are called the Ecumenical Liberation Front, who are based on the Symbionese Liberation Army, and they are and they just decide to make a TV show about them, like with the assistance of the Communist Party, and it's just very funny. I mean, it's quite like a cynical view of radical politics, but not one that comes from nowhere, where they just collaborate to make a TV show called the Mao Zedong Hour. It's like, I won't go into what that means for the plot. It's just fun. That's a thing, and it produces some very funny lines anyway. But what ends up happening basically is, like, Beale discovers that he discovers there is a great vast conspiracy I say that, like, basically just discovers, like, the business is happening, and that the network is owned by a conglomerate. It's going to be bought by another even bigger conglomerate, and he is invited by the chairman of said conglomerate to, like, go to his man. And it's very, very similar to the scene where, like, Zygarnik, like, explains what was happening to Tom Cruise, and where the chairman of this company just gives him this, like, very bombastic lecture just about basically, like, capitalism, just global capitalism in its purest form, is the most efficient way of meeting the desires of human beings, and it's as simple as that. And that the less interference there is from governments, the less we think about there being such things as nation or culture, the more we just let the energy flow. And he does talk about it in these, like, vitalistic terms. He talks about it explicitly as a cosmology. So the more we just let the energy flow, the better it's going to be for everyone. I actually kind of, like, view it almost as sort of like an unofficial prequel to Rollerball, actually, in some ways. But what's interesting here, and why I think there is where it connects with Eyes Wide Shut, is this idea that you have the spectacle, and, like, draped in very religious language, even, like, he is presented as, they call him, like, the mad prophet of the airways, and he does talk about sort of like how he's, like, heard the voice of God and he's told him to tell these things. And then when he has this confrontation with this guy about why do you want me to keep making this TV show? You know, what's so special about me? And he says to him, nothing at all. You're on television. That's it. And you have this the double bind there. You have the spectacle, which is what power kind of, like, needs. One of the things that needs to perpetuate itself. But then you also just get this quotidian, very, very material effect of it just being, well, we just need to do this, really. You know, we'll make it worth your while, and that's it. Which is exactly the conversation that Tom Cruise and Zygarnik have, where it's just him more or less telling him, sort of like, it's not worth your time worrying, just don't. And even though, and within all of this is the veiled threat. Like, it's very, very clear that throughout all of this, he is threatening him. And it's the same with, in Network. The other film I did want to talk about a little bit, and I think dramatizes this much in a very, very pulp way, literally, is Society. And I don't think either of you have seen Society, have you?
No.
Oh, you're in for a treat. It's horrid. It's a really, really, really nasty sci-fi horror movie where basically it I'm going to have to give away the end.
Is it like a body horror? I feel like I can. I haven't seen it, but there's the DVD or posters in my head. It looks like the title, like, all purpley, like a weird, like it's being written on or coming out of skin or something. I don't know. Anyway. I think I've seen it, and I've seen the poster, and it's a very affecting poster, but I've never seen the film, which is probably a sign that I definitely would like it.
Yeah, I try to find these the smell of the hunt and the taste of the shunt. That's it. Listeners are gonna know who've seen it know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it basically, and it's about this, like, young, like, teenager He lives in California. I think it's California or something like that. And he's from a very wealthy family, but he's never gotten on with his parents, his older sister. And basically, he discovers the reason why he has never gotten on with them or their rich, or all of the rich people he has in his life, despite coming from that background, is because he was adopted in secret by them, because they're not humans, and in fact, none of the rich who rule the world are. They're in fact they're not aliens. They're just an alternative species of human being who are like basically plasma monsters who just like when they all get together and they all get together in the orgies where they just literally just melt into each other's bodies into like this contiguous slime of faces and limbs, because they just for the fuck of it they just like absorb normal people who they bring into this and terrorize them, and they call it the shunt, where they just like absorb people for like nutrition and like for sexual gratification. It is really revolting. Like I've only seen it once. I watched it a few years ago, and I watched it knowing full, like, because I'd read about it like a long time before, knowing full well what I was letting myself in for. But I got to the end of it, and like tonally it's quite fun. Like it's an 80s, it's not a comedy, but it's like it's 80s body horror. It knows what it's about. It's very tongue-in-cheek. But you got to the end of this film going forward, so I just thought, fuck, I feel so bad now. Because it's one of those films where it just like, when you really think about like what the premise of it is, it's just so bleak. Like the fact of like, oh yeah, we just melt people into ourselves, and while we're all having like plasmic incest sex orgies with each other forever, and that's all of history. And of course the thing about, but the reason I mentioned this in like this film, I think like it is very much the pulp version of it. It doesn't have all of these layers of like inquiry into the nature of spectacle necessarily, but it has the same revelation of just the kind of like, again, the grubby material reality of power, that what it actually boils down to once you get, and like it does said, like this isn't a film that deals with spectacle in the same way, but what you get to when you do like go through the veils and discover where all of this actually ends, and it is just with pure just gratification of those who have the ability to gratify themselves, and that's it. Like there isn't a deeper meaning to it, and like it is a conspiracy, that is conspiring to hide the secret of its own vacuousness. That there isn't a great. It's not, like the Illuminati aren't actually guarding sort of like the secrets of Atlantis or the extraterrestrial mysteries or anything like that. It's literally just sort of like, yeah, it's just an Epstein party, really. It's just and I had a conversation with a friend of mine actually, my friend Rich. I won't drop his handle on here because I don't know if he would want that, but we were talking about like the conspiracies around Epstein and all of that, and especially so like the more exotic ones about genetic engineering experiments and all of that kind of stuff, and especially it was in response to a thread that I sent him, which was just speculating about sort of like occult ritual and so on, and like occult rituals that makes reference somehow to sort of like illicit sexual acts and so on. And his response to this was to say, basically, I think all of that's nonsense. The Epstein thing is perfectly understandable. It's just a man's fantasy of having a harem, and that's it. There isn't anything deeper to it, because there's so much like people speculating about, and I think this is a very interesting factor, is the temple on Epstein's island there that we've all seen, the blue and white striped building with the golden dome. If you actually look, there are pictures of its interior, and it's an unfinished holiday villa. Like the doors are painted on, the golden doors are painted on, they're not real. There's nothing in it. And I think, and this is the revelation at the heart of the film. This is, the fact is, like, if you were to pull the mask off of the people at the Eyes Wide Shut party, right? Although we are told that sort of like we wouldn't sleep as well at night if we knew he was there. At the same time, it's not that if we were to pull the mask away, like the cloak would like collapse to the ground, I think. And Mark draws allusions to the Mask of the Red Death, where that literally happens. It's the fact that, like, if you were to take the mask off, it would just be a completely ordinary looking person on the other side of it. Then that's it, because all of this is sort of like just some grubby rich people fucking with masks on. And again, like, this is what, and we've already alluded to this, and what Mark says in this post is that it's just really unimaginative. So what they do, they get together and they have their satanic chants and all of that. And then it's just sort of like, and now we'll do the most evil satanic thing possible. We're going to have heterosexual sex with each other in these rooms. And it's like, and the thing is like if you want to go to a party like this, you can find one just by looking up a kink club or something, right? It's not that difficult. There's just a dress code. It's like there isn't anything to illicit about what's going on there, and it demonstrates the kind of lack of imagination on the parts of those who do have this kind of level of wealth and power. And this is something, and it's a bit of a meme, really. It's a bit of a Twitter discourse, Reddit thing, talking about the fact that billionaires just make bigger boats when you could make Jeff Bezos could just pour half his fortune to figuring out an anti-gravity island he could live on. It just doesn't. It's not that I think any of us would be necessarily more imaginative if we were to have that kind of wealth, because it is just simply dehumanizing and spirit killing to possess material power of that kind, to focus all of one's energy on the sphere of Malkuth. It doesn't produce anything too interesting at the end of the day.
No tension anymore, right? There's no tension in life if you can sort everything with a check. Which I guess is what kind of comes across here, right? Is that whole... I'm sure that Mark goes onto it in the end. It's the was it? We talked about Kierkegaard for a minute. It's only through a constant acknowledgement of your own finitude and the embracing of life's tension that life can fully be lived. Which sounds very grand when you're talking about Kierkegaard, but I just sort of feel like that when I check my bank balance every month. It's the finitude of my own wallet is enough to keep life going, ticking over. You probably don't have that if you're a Bezos or a whoever else.
I got a few just because there was a couple of things I mentioned earlier that I want to come back to, just because I don't want to forget them. On the theme of doubling again, there's very, very obvious, not only in the masks, but there's some very, very interesting allusions to The Shining in this film. And I mentioned this already, the argument Cruise and Kidman have, which I think is probably the best bit in the film, actually. That's this extended argument they have in the bedroom about infidelity. He is so much like Jack Nicholson in that, because there's in particular the way that Jack Torrance just has this very not restrained. Well, he's Jack Nicholson, of course, not restrained, but this very, very I'm going to speak to you very clearly now, Wendy, kind of energy to him when he starts to really turn. And he embodies that same, I'm going to speak to you very clearly on this subject now, that kind of just someone very, very clearly just about keeping, a check on their emotions at that point, but definitely making it clear to you exactly how they feel, and the fact they could fucking kill you if they wanted to, right there, with that kind of level of just frustration. Maybe I'm exaggerating. I don't think Eyes Wide Shut necessarily goes that far with it, or Cruise's performance doesn't go quite that far with it, but it is still... It's so obvious that he mirroring that character to me, and even I'm just checking that he is called Jack Torrance in The Shining, isn't he? I didn't just imagine that. Yes, he is. Yeah, just embarrassing moment, but I got that wrong. But just the fact that even their names, they've got very, very throwaway names. Bill, Jack, sorry to all the Bills and Jacks who are fans of this podcast, but you know what I mean. It's very American, all American names. Bill, Jack, and as well as, and I don't think there's necessarily any. Just the fact I think that there are deliberate resonances between these films, and I'm not quite sure how they all necessarily add together, but they are definitely there. And the other thing as well is the Christmas party at the start is not the same music from The Shining, the famous music from the Gold Room, but it does have that feeling to it, because it is something that you're just about hearing echoing out to you in a room that is literally very gold as well. I don't know what this means. I just want to acknowledge that it is there in the same way that I think The Shining is one of the. I mean, this is why there's that like wonderfully silly documentary, Room 237, about which isn't about decrypting The Shining, but about attempts to decrypt The Shining, none of which work, all of which are mad. There's some somewhat more compelling than others, but all of them like feel like they rest on very, very tenuous readings of the film. But The Shining is just one of the most tremendously elusive films you'll ever see, which is I absolutely love it. It's a film I don't know how many times I've seen it, and it constantly gets away from you what it's actually about and what is actually happening. In the same way 2001 does, that you get to the end of that film and you're just left so much on your own to interpret it. And I think, like I said, I don't think Eyes Wide Shut achieves those heights, but it is still. It's not a playfulness. That's the wrong word because that's too humanizing. But again, there is this elusiveness with what's actually happening here. Like we don't know if Zyger's telling the truth or not. He might be. Like, he might literally say, no, we didn't kill her, she just overdosed. It's perfectly possible that that's true. But you can't get away from the obvious threats going on under what he's saying to him. And just the fact that sort of like there was like a satanic ritual orgy party he just stumbled on with secret passwords, which is just clearly like, it's sus. You know, like, that is definitely sus. And of course, like, the most tremendously like disquieting moment in the film, in my opinion, actually is the very, very end, where they go Christmas shopping with their little girl, and it's just a very, very uncomfortable moment where you realise, because she's like running off to like look at toys, and she like comes back and they go and find her, and they're very disinterested in her because they're having their conversation about the state of their marriage. And then that whole final discussion that they have, where they decide, you know, we should be grateful for what we have, you just realise you've no idea where their daughter is. And the film ends when she says that we need to fuck. It's the end of the film. It's the end of the last Stanley Kubrick film, and it's like, where's their daughter? It's just something that like really feels like it really, really emphasizes that elusiveness, brings it to the fore. You know, the fact that like we don't really know how these threads tie together. Maybe they simply don't. That you know, in the same way that dreams never quite tie together. All that how like the great films of Stanley Kubrick, with all with their resonances with one another, like, are ultimately very deeply elusive. And that's also why I don't like Full Metal Jacket very much. I don't think it has those layers to it. I don't think it's interesting in the same way. I don't think it has as much to say because it has too much to say. Sorry, that's so pretentious, but
no, I think like Mark wrote about that very final scene as well, and I thought it was really interesting. I wanted to quote something from it. Kubrick's obsessively cultivated ambiguity leaves open the possibility that the whole episode at Somerton, that's the orgy, together with the later scene in the pool hall, which is when Ziegler is kind of offering him excuses as an out, are some kind of initiatory rite which draws Bill into closer proximity with the power elite, as if what Ziegler himself calls the stage charade was, like the gate in Kafka's famous parable, meant only for him. So that Alice's final fuck, the last word in the film, that is, the last word in Kubrick's last film, operates as the order word indicating the Harford's quietist acceptance of / into the core, or at least an inner circle closer to the core. So yeah, it's this idea that like the ritual isn't the initiation. The initiation is accepting that the ritual might not be a big deal. I really like that idea. It's just like accepting compartmentalization, like allowing that the elites are going to be doing these things, and that it's like, and just continuing on with your life and continue to engage with the same polite society that they engage with. Like, I guess it's, like just accepting things as they are willingly. That's the final stage of the initiation.
It reminds me, actually, and it's kind of what reminded me of, I was thinking of this when you were talking about the Epstein chapel thing. that maybe in Kubrick's films they're kind of like, I mean, especially Eyes Wide Shut, but I think maybe also The Shining in a different way. But maybe that's put in that for a minute. But it's like to stick with the Epstein's. What is it? Chapel? Is that what people call it?
Temple.
Temple. But it reminds me of like it's the setting for like an Ari Aster film, was it Midsummer or Hereditary, where I guess without spoiling the plots too much, like both those films kind of feel the opposite of what you just described, Corey, where you kind of got like life happens, like horrific things happen to these people, or they're going through some sort of very kind of materially felt or measured trauma, and then the horror, weirdly, which I guess I've always kind of found both of those films, they're really popular, quite anticlimactic, is that the horror seems to be that actually there's a higher power or plot in place. So like I guess there's the part in, to maybe partly spoil the plot of Hereditary, there's like the young girl who loses her head in the sort of like a tragic accident, but then there's kind of like this layering of imagery that actually that's kind of was meant to happen, and she kind of becomes a vessel for Pazuzu or some demonic favorite from Hollywood past. But it's like, yeah, it feels like there's an opposite in a lot of Kubrick's films that I think actually Mark touches upon, if not in this post, but again it's in this forum discussion that we'll put in the show notes. But there's this point where he brings Barry Lyndon into it too, which actually is the only Kubrick film I haven't seen. I've been meaning to for ages. But he says Barry Lyndon, Eyes Wide Shut and The Shining all anatomize human emotional folly. All three are about problematics of empathy-sympathy, but it's not clear that they make us feel sympathetic or empathic. It's not clear, for instance, that we identify with Dr. Bill or Barry. And there's a point further up where Mark kind of makes that this is a really interesting point. This question of empathy is really interesting for him. And it's kind of something that he writes a lot about in his PhD thesis, and it's also kind of central to a lot of the CCRU stuff. And Mark drew a lot at that time on the work of this guy called Wilhelm Voeringer, who was most likely he got from reading Deleuze and Guattari, who draw on a bunch of his books. One's called Abstraction and Empathy, the other's something about the Gothic. I can't remember the title now. Anyway, but Mark writes about it here, and I think in a way that maybe is quite interesting in terms of, I think it maybe ties into a lot of what we've talked about, not only in terms of masks and that kind of strange hiding, but precisely, yeah, that feeling that actually the ritual, that the spectacle is kind of is an emotional folly, something that actually hides the horror of the real. That kind of in that sort of sense that we were talking about with the I mean, it's that line that I really love out of this essay that we have been reading. What does he say? The venal, idiot, mechanical repetition of the pleasure principle laid bare, which again I guess is that Epstein thing, right? That there's not a secret society, it's literally just billionaire pleasure principle and the horror of that sort of banality. Anyway, there's a bit that Mark writes here in this conversation where it says the question of empathy is a fascinating one and calls to mind Voeringer's distinction between abstraction and empathy. Empathy is the emotion correlated with organic or representational art, which reflects the subject back to itself. Abstract art, by contrast, is mechanical, devoid of a sense of empathy, confronting the subject with something irrevocably unassimilable. The two fuse in what he calls the Northern Line, essentially Gothic art culminating in the German Expressionist tradition, in which there is a quote, a requisition of our capacity for empathy, which is bound up with organic rhythm for an abstract world which is alien to it. So I guess you have that, I guess what Mark's saying, and I think it's specifically true for Eyes Wide Shut and what he's talking about in this blog post, is that that's kind of the double bind, right? You have this sense that there's a lot of stuff here about like conspiracy, sex, things that we sort of festival, things that we associate with kind of human emotion and passion. And yet, you know, this it's a film about passion displayed dispassionately. As if there's the double bind is that Well, precisely. My ramble is just to sort of say that I think what you just said at the end, Corey, was kind of the perfect summation. What if the ritual? What if the ritual isn't that important? I think that's like this. I think what sounds like a kind of throwaway remark. I think there's so much significance in that as like a summary of this film, but I guess also in I mean, well, to maybe to push back. I mean, not that I disagree with you, Sean, but to push back on your point on Full Metal Jacket, maybe that's something even in that film too, right? The whole I'm thinking of how I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy, the kind
the
of
drill sergeant.
No, the soldier who commits suicide.
Or Gomer Pyle.
Yeah, so he gets really into the ritual, right? Of this rifle is mine. Is it right? This gun is mine, and it's blah blah blah. The ritual of maintaining his weapon, and yet also that seems to be the meaningless of the ritual is kind of what drives him to sort of that despair and sort of a violent murder suicide thing at the end. I mean, I'm forgetting partly the plot of Full Metal Jacket. But I feel like there's something in that, right? It's that seems to be something that comes in all of Kubrick's films in a way that or I don't know, yeah, the northern line, the conflation of the two, where either we become empathetic with the abstract, or our empathy is abstracted. Yeah, I just find that super interesting. But sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so just to cover myself, the character's name is Leonard Lawrence, but they nickname him Gomer Pyle.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Yes, I think maybe I'm going to call time on that if we don't have, unless we have burning points that we've not brought up yet. I think we've been talking for, I'm not quite sure, but over an hour. Do you have any final closing remarks or thoughts to share, Corey?
No, I got through most of everything, I think. I mean, I didn't go deep into Arizona Wilder and her claims that Kubrick was on the money. But, but no, I think that's really just a way that Mark was tying it into the Monarch post. Probably a little subtle wink to reveal the who was behind that anonymous piece, I think.
Matt, any final thoughts from you?
No, I'm going to just keep thinking about Corey's penultimate thought, I think, for the rest of the week. What if the ritual's not that important? There's a whole therapy session packed in there, I think, for me. I'm really I think that was great. I'm really, that's it. That's my final thought and my enduring thought, I think.
I don't know if I should apologise or say you're welcome for that.
No, it's great. No, I'm thank you for it. That's a real chin stroker. I'm going to enjoy thinking about that.
Right. Well then, we will wrap it up now. I think it's been fairly tight and efficient by our standards. Don't expect that again. Matt, where can people find you?
You can find me at Xenogothic in all the usual places, xenogothic.com, and on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Corey, same question.
Yep, I'm on Twitter at CJWhite, or my website is CoreyJWhite.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at Hauntonaut. Thank you very much for joining us. I don't know when this episode is going to be going live. We're going to be taking a break for a couple of weeks before we record our next one. So you will hear from us very, very soon with your instructions. Take care, everybody. And yes, just take care, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye, buddies.
Bye, buddies.